for some reason on these group calls it doesn't show. Do you guys see that the camera or the recording is happening?
Yes, it's going.
Okay, all right. So this is the Friday evening Sangha in the U.S. or Saturday morning here in Thailand. Um, Michael, you had a question a moment ago. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So recently, I was doing a bit of public speaking, and the the fear of public speaking arose in me, and I kind of thought about the clammy hands and whatever else you might get. Had a little Dhammarato voice in the back of my head when that arose, and the thought that came to my mind was, "Is this useful?" And it was immediately apparent that it wasn't, and I tossed it out. And of course, I had to pat myself on the back and say, I'm going to tell Dhammarato about this and see what he thinks. So,
All right. Well, I'll pat you on the back too. Congratulations. Yes, these are the kind of things that we can look at. In fact, that's part of the investigation. That's something that we can say. That normally what I speak on um, is this thought wholesome or not? But you're using the question, is it useful? Is it valuable? Would be another way of asking. Is this a useful thought? And having thoughts of trepidation when you're about to give a public talk about, oh no, I hope I don't screw this up, is not a very wholesome thought. That a much more wholesome thought is that, wow, look at all my friends there. Normally, when
that's
we
so
see,
true. Replacing it is a big part of it, isn't it?
mhm, yes, so much of the time when we're out in public like that, um, it's actually a skill to be developed. Just because of the kind of background that I had, I got used to being on stage. Uh, the the music teacher, we we had a dance band. We had a Christmas performance. We were out on the marching field during the football season in October and whatnot like that. Plus, um, I played piano at church and other things like that. So when I got into university and got a chance to speak more publicly, I didn't have quite that problem. And by the time that I had actually became a teacher, professor, associate professor at Detroit Institute of Technology, I never had any of that kind of stuff. That this is something that can be trained, but unfortunately, you can't round up an audience of two or three or four or 500 people just so you can practice being a public speaker or a public performer. But we can make sure that we have the correct attitude of that these people are my friends. They came to hear what I have to say, and what I have to say is useful, valuable, and wholesome for them. That's all the kind of thought that you need. Just like on these Saturday calls that we have, that I can come onto the Saturday call completely unprepared. Sometimes I have a sutta that I want to do, or something, the answer to a follow-on answer to a question. Um, but it has, I think, to do with that confidence that you can handle that audience. Um, in public speaking, they have some tricks that you can do. One of the tricks is to imagine that everybody in the audience that realm what that means is that everybody in the audience is also vulnerable. Just like one feels vulnerable when they're on center stage, when everybody's got their attention pointing at you, you feel vulnerable. So if you can make everybody in the audience just as vulnerable as you, then that's a winning situation. But the way that I'm talking about it is that let's not need that vulnerability. We don't feel vulnerable, so we don't have to make the audience vulnerable also. We can leave them in their clothes because I've got my clothes on. That there's no problem with that. And then the other technique would be to find someone in the audience who you know and make contact, eye contact with them. Maybe even mention their name. And then the rest of the talk, you directly direct the talk just to them, like it was a one-on-one situation, and all these other people are kind of doing their own thing, which may or may not be listening to what you have to say. And so those are two of the techniques that we can use that public speaking, coaches talk about. But the main thing is to get your confidence up that there's no problem here. Everything is already okay. We can handle this. And so the question that you were asking is a correct question. Is this useful? Is this okay? The other thing that I would say is that in general, be prepared. Don't go out talking on a topic that you don't have knowledge on, because deep inside that knowledge will create fear. The knowledge that you don't have the knowledge, I mean. And so be ready for everything, including you can tell yourself that you're prepared, you got what you need. Also, I've noticed
Yeah,
from time,
that's
go ahead.
exactly what I thought. I like it. I was gonna say that's exactly the thoughts I had. Um, I really can connect with what you're saying. I guess is what I'm saying.
Hmm. So, does anybody else have any further questions or topics that they want to talk about? Pedro, we can go back to what you were mentioning before.
Yes. Uh, about the first jhana.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, here's something kind of interesting on that point. Is that these jhanas were known in the time of the Buddha. That the jhanas were known before, in fact, when he was a child. There's a sutra where he talks about that he remembers that as a child, maybe about the age of 12, 13, something like that he was sitting under the rose apple tree while his father was doing um, the opening plowing ceremony. Um, and so young Siddhartha was then, rather than practicing meditation, he just was sitting under the rose apple tree watching the ceremony, being very pleasant, easygoing, and whatnot like that, and then was able to go into the first jhana, possibly the way that he had practiced it before. And so this, hi Eric. So this is an important point. Is that these jhanas were well known by part of the culture. It would be almost like going, one or two or three of us went to back to the 1800s and started talking about television. And the people there around us, they have no concept of television. And so there's a whole lot of technical details that we could go into, but it's still just a concept. Okay, so in a way, you can say that jhana was what their television was way back when. And so we get into a state of television watching entertainment, and sometimes while we're watching television, not paying attention to our own problems, sometimes just in an audience listening to music, by the way, that we can fall into these really, really good feeling states. And often we don't even know it. We're not paying much attention to it. But in the time of the Buddha, the jhanas were well known. I mean, what else are you going to do with your time? You got no job. You've got no television. You've got no cars or any place to travel. Here you are. What are you going to do? Why not just sit down and enjoy the moment? But you see, our society has gotten really busy. We've got such a busy society, a whole lot of make do work, like full employment and all of that kind of stuff, right? So it's a completely different world, a different mentality. And here, these jhanas sound quite foreign to us. In a way, what's foreign is sitting down with nothing to do, which would be a natural state in many old primitive societies. You got nothing to do. So you're the prince. Yeah, but that's all right. There's nothing to do. Or maybe you're the servant and you're sitting there with the prince, and the prince has got nothing to do. You got nothing to do. And everybody just sits around with nothing to do, no place to go. And so these jhana states are easy enough to go into. Now, the next point about that is that upon reflection years later, when the Buddha was doing all these heavy duty austerities, that he came upon, why am I afraid of the pleasures of just sitting by and doing nothing? Why am I afraid of this first jhana with its pleasure? And so then he reflected, all of this stuff that I've been trying for, this awakening, this enlightenment, is right there in the first jhana. Why am I afraid of the first jhana? Why did I leave the jhanas and go off and do all of these austerities and things? And so he came back and sat in the first jhana, and while he was in the first jhana with all wholesome thoughts, he began to figure out how the mind worked. That in fact, what he was doing is exactly what he recommends for us to do, is just to sit with no place to go and nothing to do. And when some thought comes up about some place to go or something to do, we can say, aha, I see you, Mara. And just throw that thought out and come back to being in a state of nothing to do, nowhere to go, and everything that you do is actually a child's toy to play with, as opposed to work that has to get done. So, actually, an example of that would be when a kid goes hunting. This is from my old Southern tradition where back in the 1950s, everybody went hunting, especially up in the mountains. And so the kid goes with the adults. And the first time that he goes, he can go with one of two ideas. One is he's got to go with the idea, I got to keep up with these guys. I've got to be a man. I've got to do my job, which is the way that we normally think. Or the kid can go out hunting with the guys saying, wow, let me watch what's going on. I'm okay. Everything is all right. I'm really glad they let me go hunting with them. And there is no pressure on me for making the kill. So the pressure is on, can you do the job, whatever the job is? And when we have that pressure, then we're in that ordinary state, filled with hindrances. But when we have the mental state of everything is okay, there's really no problem at all. That if I make a kill or if I shoot the gun, then that's okay. And if I don't shoot the gun, that's okay. All right. So from that perspective, we can come back to see that we can actually begin to have our lives like that. That whatever you do, it's just a game to play, a toy to play with. That there's no pressure. We literally take the pressure off. No place to go and nothing to do. Now that's the first basic practice of anapanasati, is to get in that wholesome state where there really is no work to do, no thoughts of work, nothing going on, no place to go. And then we can get into a really pleasant state. So this pleasant state actually, from the old literature, we find that it's got basically 6 factors. In some of the sutras, it's got 5, and in other sutras, it's got 6 factors. That 6th factor, by the way, is relaxation of the body, when the body is completely relaxed. Now, it's best relaxed if it's laying down or if it's sitting, but you can also be relaxed in the body walking or even just standing. You can relax. And the thing that I find kind of amazing, you guys have been in lines before, or queue, to buy a ticket, to wait for the bank teller, uh, in train stations and in doctor's offices. They normally have a waiting room where people can sit. But let us talk about maybe a standing line. Uh, Here's an example. Apple store is about to open and they've got a brand new iPhone. And people are there camped on waiting for that store to open. Okay. Now, here's the point that I'm making is that when we are standing in line, often waiting for something, we're agitated. Look at the people in line. Okay. Another example of the line would be waiting to get on the boat. Everybody's lined up or waiting to get into the airplane. All right. And you'll notice that almost everyone, if you're looking, you can see that people are agitated. They're fidgeting. They've got stuff on their mind. They've got travel plans. They're thinking about where they're going. Very few people are actually able to stand in line comfortably, happily. Just no place to go and nothing to do. Yeah, I'm standing in line, and every minute or so the line moves a little bit, and that's okay. Um, that in fact, one of the things that we could do while we're in line is to help the people in the line with us to relax. We could say hello to them and smile, and everything is okay, and people can relax. But they need to, let us say, be reminded of that, because the normal state that the human has gotten themselves into since the ancient days is a state of anxiety, a state of something's got to be done, something place to go. It would be almost like that in the time of the Buddha, there was a sensory deprivation. There was no entertainment. People just sat around with nothing to do. As opposed to nowadays, look how much there is to do. I mean, in the old days, there was plenty of movies. But now that all the movies are done on computers with digitization, there's tens of thousands of movies. I mean, Netflix comes up with a dozen new movies every day, and so does Amazon, and so does all the others. And so the amount of entertainment that's available is just way over what one person can do. And so we get greedy for, I want to go do this, I want to go do that, I want to go see this, I want to go there. And because of that, we're now in a state of perpetual motion, perpetual anxiety, perpetual going, perpetual getting. And we're trained that way from childhood. In the time of the Buddha, the kids weren't trained that way. That in fact, the way that the kids were trained was more from the perspective of, oh, that's delightful, let me go look at that. But there's an additional thing that's been added to our society. In fact, I was quite surprised when I read this. This is actually in Sutta number 38, um, which is the Mahakangababanga Sutta, which is Sati, son of a fisherman, is confused about consciousness and that kind of stuff. And in the second part of this particular sutta, it talks about how the young people um, get wrapped up in all of the stuff that they do in the time of the Buddha. But one of the things that I've noticed in there is that the people nowadays have two problems. In the time of the Buddha, they only had one problem. They only had one issue, and that was sensual delight, going and finding something that was interesting. But now we have the additional problem, which is a much bigger problem of avoidance of pain. In other words, we now live in a society based upon punishment. We fill our prisons to punish people. People are afraid. We've got police. We talked about the police before. The police are out everywhere trying to enforce the law. I think the people would be much happier and there would be a whole lot less law breaking if the cops went home and took their shoes off and leave people alone. And if everybody went home and took their shoes off, then we would have an easygoing society. It's the fact that everybody's got their shoes on, out running around trying to fix things that are broken. And so that whole idea that things are broken is a new concept that has come into modern society that didn't happen in the time of the Buddha. In the time of the Buddha, things were either ordinary with nothing to do and no place to go, or there was something delightful to go look at. And this is what the Buddha was warning them about, is about the sensuality of the delightful things that we can go and do, when in fact we could just sit and enjoy doing nothing instead. But now we have the double problem, that we not only have too much sensuality, too many movies, too many drag shows, too many drag queens, too many hoochie goochie shows. We just got so much, too many things happening on the internet. And we get kind of lustful for wanting data, wanting to bring it in. And so there is a whole lot more stuff happening now than there was happening in the time of the Buddha. But we've also got this additional second problem of not only do we have all of this sensual entertainment and all of that, its underlying position of it is everything is broken and needs to be fixed. Jobs to do, work to have done, etc., like that. And so now we have an additional problem. In fact, most of the unwholesome thoughts that we have nowadays is the unwholesome thoughts of, I got to fix this, or I got work to do, or I got to do something, which is different than, um, I like that. And so in the time of the Buddha, they were much more greed oriented, but not nearly with as much stuff to be greedy about as we have today. To where today we have both of the issues of both the ill will and way more things to be greedy about than they had in the time of the Buddha. So the circumstances that we have in Western civilization goes against us being able to get any good practice going for the teachings of the Buddha at all. That in fact the way that the Westerners approach it is, um, meditation. That's what Buddhism is all about. Let me go do some meditation, and then they go and they take a course in meditation, and they wind up working really hard at it. They're still not getting that state of no place to go and nothing to do, and everything is really easy, because now we've got a new set of things to be greedy for, a whole new set of things that's got Buddhist labels on them. And so the Western mentality takes all of this heavy duty greed and puts that on the Buddhism. Oh, I want jhana. Oh, I want to be a sotapan. Oh, I want nibbana. Oh, I want to be enlightened. Oh, I want this. Oh, I want that. Oh, I can attain this, that, and the other thing. Oh, I want magical powers. I want spiritual powers. Here's an interesting point. Why do people want spiritual powers? The internet's full of it. Um, Guru Viking often has interviews with people who are talking about magical powers, spiritual powers. There's even been fire casino meditation retreats. Everybody goes to the retreat wanting to gain magical spiritual powers. Eric, why do people want spiritual powers?
It's a fun idea.
It's a fun idea. Okay. Uh, Pedro, why do people want spiritual powers?
I don't know, because they think it's an easy way to have something, yeah, something funny, and maybe to not fatigue for it. Like, okay, I can't have a Lamborghini. Let me try with superpowers.
Uh-huh. Okay, Michael, why do you think that people want spiritual powers?
My theory is we treat having nothing to do like it's a problem to be solved
Mm-hmm.
rather than a desirable state. And so we say, I'm a good, hardworking American. I can't just sit there and do nothing like Dhammarato says. I've got to do a 16-step process and be able to have these magical powers. That's kind of what it feels like.
Uh-huh. Okay. Let's go down to a more basic level, and that is that we all, in the society that we live in, is based upon fear. Our greed can be said is the fear of missing out. Oh, all of those people have that Lamborghini. I want one too. Okay, so it's the fear of missing out, of not getting enough, is part of it. But there's also a fear of I can't I can't get enough, or those people are more powerful than I am. They may hurt me. Okay, so basically, what we can say then is that the magical powers that the Westerners want come down to either they want to show off or they want to hurt someone. Why else would you want any magical powers? The example that is often used, in fact, it's in the sutras of the monk being sitting cross-legged, flying through the air like a bird. Eric, is that possible? Is that magical power possible? So someone can sit cross-legged like they're in meditation and fly through the air.
I think you can have that experience.
I didn't say the experience because, in fact, you can feel weightless. You can feel buoyant. Okay, you can get the feeling of flying through the air. You can also um, get the feeling. The one that I had a lot with Goenka is feeling very, very, very big, like 60 or 100 feet tall. That I would look down um, almost as if I was on a high-rise building, like from the Empire State Building, and you look down and everything is tiny and everything is small. Okay, so this is the experience you can have of being weightless or being very high or being flying through the air. But there is a hand mudra, and the hand mudra is with the hand, with the palm of the hand resting on the knee, so that this finger is just above the floor or just above the ground, so that when we get into this state of flying through the air or feeling um, very, very large and far and distant from everything, is just touch the earth. This is actually the touch the earth mudra, is to come back and ground yourself, to recognize that you're not flying through the air like you imagine, you're not 60 feet tall like it feels, that the reality is just with the touch of the finger on the ground, and that will reground us. And so there's another very closely related issue. It's called the flying carpet. And this comes out of the Middle Ages and is normally associated with Islam. Have you ever heard of the flying carpets? Sure you have. Aladdin's got one, that kind of thing. All right. Is that flying carpet possible? Well, we can say, well,
No.
that religion over there believes in that kind of stuff, but there has never been a flying carpet put on the market. I mean, you can go down and buy a Chevy, or you can buy a Ford or a Lamborghini or whatever like that, but I don't know of any flying carpet salesman anywhere. And the lack of the flying carpets, the lack of availability, points in the direction is they don't exist. And then you can get into the engineering and the propulsion and all of that kind of stuff and recognize that gravity is there, and what's going to be your anti-gravity device. There's no wings on a flying carpet. How can it fly? And we can come to the understanding that flying carpets don't exist. Flying carpets don't exist, and we can easily handle that. I mean, that's an Islamic thing anyway. But then monks flying through the air, sitting cross-legged, that's Buddhist. Maybe that's possible. But in fact, it's just the same thing. It's impossible to do. And so
It's like a
getting,
dream.
huh?
It's like a dream.
It's like a dream.
Like if it were possible, there wouldn't be necessarily anything special to it, because like the two elements that are associated with that dream are that you can levitate and that you feel like powerful or really good doing it. So in an isolated fashion, like those things exist because you can through the jhanas feel really good, and you can through like super magnets and cold metal like levitate,
Hmm.
but that wouldn't necessarily fulfill the fantasy of someone who's wanting to levitate using meditation, because it's a desire.
Right. Okay. So then someone can feel like they're flying in meditation. And then the next thing is that, oh, I actually want to go flying around. I want people to see me flying through the air. Okay, that's the whole idea, is that we want to feel special. We want to feel on top of the world, and that we're not going to be able to get much of that, so the story goes, by sitting around with nothing to do and no place to go. But that's an attainment. And so the Westerners would rather have spiritual powers than the actual power of feeling safe and secure and comfortable, sitting with no place to go and nothing to do. That in fact, in our society, we call that boredom. Why? Because we want something to do. We want something to occupy the mind, and we haven't figured out that reality, as it presents itself through the sensory input, is entertainment enough. We do not need the cell phone. We do not need the TV. That the reality of the moment is sensory input enough for entertainment. And so we can just sit here with nothing to do and no place to go and experience the reality of the situation without adding anything to it. So, this whole idea then of the magical powers has to do with the fact that we want something that we don't have. And so, for many people, then the magical power is a not, it's a side trip. It's a rat hole that they go down, and they wind up being not satisfied with what they're doing because they want these magical powers. And so whatever they're doing, they're not getting the magical powers. And so they wind up in their meditation being disappointed. Another example of that would be when people are practicing and then they have that experience of feeling 60 feet tall or whatever like that. Um, and when we do that, now we like that and we want it again. So the first time, whatever we were doing, we were practicing correctly. No place to go and nothing to do. And all of a sudden, I fall into a state where I feel 60 feet tall. And later, I'm sitting with nothing to do and no place to go. And then we have the thought, oh, but I want to feel 60 feet tall again. I want to feel like I'm flying through the air again. And now we're adding something new. What is the new? The desire, the greed for re-experiencing an experience that we've had before rather than allowing the experience that we're having right now to be good enough. And so our whole society is based upon teaching children that things are not good enough. You don't know enough. You didn't do it good enough. Yeah, you got an A, but you didn't get an A plus, right? We just keep striving for more and more. Every time that we reach a particular status or place, we want even more. An example of that would be Microsoft Windows. Way back in the 1990s, they began to develop Windows. And then they got Windows NT and then 3.11. And then, oh, XP and Millennium and all different versions of it, one after another, making small improvements. And that basically a company like Microsoft can't put out a product that's good enough because 3 years later, everybody's already bought it and now they've got nothing new to sell. So we have to keep developing the software. It's got to keep getting better and better and getting the people desire enough to go out and get the next version, the new version, right? But the old version was good enough. It might have had some improvements. And yet nowadays, I imagine that almost no one is actually running Windows 3.11, and it was really the its cadits back in the 90s. I mean, that thing was, it even had networking, that kind of stuff. So um, this is actually progress in a way, but look at the technological progress that's been made in our society, and yet everybody is just as miserable as they were 100 years ago without TV, without radio, without cell phones. And in fact, our society now is even more hung up. Way back when, there were no drugs to take. There was a few patent medicines that they had around 1900. There was a big kerfuffle because of what they called snake oil salesmen and whatnot like that would sell anything. But now the pharmaceutical companies are doing that same thing. The pharmaceutical companies that actually are manufacturing medicine are generally charlatans. They don't want to develop medicines that actually cure a disease. They want to develop a medicine that'll help people with that disease to feel a little bit better. But we don't want to cure them because if we cure them, they'll stop taking our medicine. We want to keep them hooked on the medicine because they don't ever get any real relief from it. And so our
How
whole
do
system.
would you
Yeah,
recommend? Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. How would you recommend? So, if we fully accept the ideas of having nothing to do being a desirable state and good enough being good enough, how do we go out in the world with that when, if I tell my boss this report's good enough, she'll make me redo it. If I tell my wife I have nothing to do, she'll tell me to take the garbage out. How do you interact in the world when good enough isn't good enough for everyone else, and nothing to do is a problem to solve for everyone else?
Well, you've got a whole thing there. The first thing to recommend is that we need to practice this alone because the whole world wants us to go do stuff. And so getting into the retreat, unfortunately, the retreats wind up with all the students got to do stuff. They got to meditate. They got to do what everybody else is doing. Getting really to the point of no place to go and nothing to do, and doing that happily, is the skill that has to be developed, because we don't have that skill. You could almost say that we had that skill when we were 2 and 3 years old, but we've lost it. We've lost the skill of just enjoying ourselves, just playing. That what we're doing right now is just okay. No place else to go and nothing else to do. Ah, Alex, good to see you. As a bit of review, we've been talking about the difference between what it was like in the time of the Buddha and what it's like now. And the fact that even though that we've got a huge amount of technologies that they didn't have back then, basically the society didn't have a whole lot of places to go and didn't have a lot of stuff to do. And here our society is just absolutely loaded down with stuff to do and places to go. And Michael just mentioned that if he told his wife he's got no place to go and nothing to do, she'll tell him to take out the trash. Okay. Now, Michael, you can smile at her with nothing to do and no place to go, and then you can go and you can pick up the trash happily with no place to go and nothing to do, and you can take it out the road with the mentality of no place to go and nothing to do, and I'm just having fun with this trash. Okay, it's but when the wife told you to take out the trash, she gave you marching orders. Now the story actually that I normally use is the teenage boy who his mother tells him to take out the trash. And when he takes out the trash because he's been told to do it, he's resentful. He doesn't really want to take out the trash. And so when he does it slowly, he does it in a bad feeling. He picks up the trash and he hauls it out to the yard or to the road and possibly drops half of it in the yard. And now he's got more work to do. Okay. But now the other side of it is that he walks into the kitchen on his own and sees that the trash is there and mom hasn't come home yet. And so he says, hot dog, mom's going to be really happy if she comes home and sees that the trash has been taken out. And so now the teenager can pick that trash up, haul it out to the road happily. Now the question is, which one of these two situations would you prefer to be in? Or which one, the better question would be, which one is the most work? Taking the trash out because we see that it's a good idea and that we can do it happily, or do it because we're told to do it. And then we have to do it because we're told to. Michael, what do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, it looks like I'm taking the trash out either way, but I like that approach. That's
Mm-hmm.
an awesome example.
Yes, that we in fact can take out the trash with the mentality of no place to go and nothing to do and everything is going to be all right. But we don't. We are trained to feel bad about all of the trash taking out. We don't want to do it. We avoid doing it. We know how bad we feel when we do it because we've been told to do it. Then, in fact, this doing what we're told to do, the Buddha refers that to the woeful state of being an animal. Now, most people, and in fact, I did at one time, when we think about becoming an animal, we think about becoming a worm or a leech or something like that. But really, what the Buddha was talking about was draft animals, horses, oxen, bulls, donkeys, who have to do work, but they don't get any value out of their work. The humans get all the value out of it. So now we can say that that same thing happens today, is that we go as an ordinary worker to work, and the people who make the most value out of it are the top dogs, or let us call them the devas, the ones who control the company.
You know,
All right.
that is awesome because whenever I read Devas in the suttas, I could never relate. And you totally just made that relatable.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, as a side point for that word deva, when it's seen in the suttas, the translators always give us a magical translation of deva. But when you use the word deva, we don't use it as a magical term like a god. We talk about the devas in the sense of the celebrities, the Hollywood, the rich people. That's how we use the word deva. And that's how it was used in the time of the Buddha also. In fact, there are suttas, one of them in particular in the Digha Nikaya number 2, where the king is referred to several times as the deva.
Huh.
Okay, they
And if
actually
we
called
look
it. Oh,
to
pardon?
some cosmological ideas from back then as well, if we look to the realms right below the Dewas, we have those lesser Dewas that are always trying to get up and they're always getting knocked back down. But their whole point is, even though they've got a whole bunch of good stuff, they're still trying to get right up to that last
Right,
layer.
right,
And they're
trying to get
always
more.
making war.
Always making
Mm-hmm.
war, always wanting more, always
Mm-hmm.
abusing their animals.
Always
Lord.
being sad about never getting up to the top. Yeah. It's
Hmm.
such a wonderful, wonderful way to talk about our world.
Right. But in
Oh,
fact, to further on, that particular sutta that I just mentioned in the Digha Nikaya, I've forgotten the guy's name, but he actually killed his father, who was the emperor,
Oh, I know which one you're
and
talking about.
that the Buddha was a good friend of his father.
Mm-hmm.
But when this new king came to ask the Buddha question, the Buddha just gave him normal answers the way that the Buddha would. He didn't says, "Well, why should I talk to you? You just killed my best friend who happened to have been the king." No, he just treated him like a king. Okay, that's what you're doing now. Um, that in fact, this is the line of royalty that gave rise to King Asok later. That in fact, I think that there was two Bimbisaras. There was one who was his grandfather, and then the other one was his great great grandfather, who is the one who was the. There had to have been two Bimbisaras because we know enough about the time and the dates and whatnot
Mm-hmm.
that there was just too much time for the Bimbisara to be actually King Asok's father. Also, King Bimbisara, who was a student of the Buddha, was not known to be a warrior. And yet the Bimbisara, who was the grandfather of Asok, was a warrior. And so that's why I would say that there would be two of them. But meanwhile, back to the point is that we do things, we take out the trash because we're told to do it. We get started in that in primary school or in kindergarten. That in fact, I remember when I was teaching meditation uh, at a church. It was a Unitarian church, and they had an old Unitarian preacher that wrote a book, and that there was a passage in this book that was so profound that everybody at the Unitarian churches would post this up on the wall someplace. Okay, so this is kind of famous, and okay, you got to go.
Yeah.
See
Have
you.
a good
See
one,
you.
guys.
All
Take
right.
care.
So the this story in the that this preacher, this Unitarian preacher, was saying is that everything that he needed to know in life, he learned in kindergarten. Everything he needed to learn in his life, he learned in kindergarten. And then he lists these things. And so we can check this out too. One of the things he learned to do was to stand in line, to get in line. They'd line up the little children all over the place. The teachers who is taking all the kids to the art class or whatever like that, she doesn't just say, come on, kids, let's go, and every kid just is on his own. No, they line them up. We are taught in school to stand in line. Another thing that he said he learned was how to pick up his toys and clean up. The basic kind of things that he thinks were the most important were, in fact, how to get along in society. He was teaching this book that he wrote about everything that I ever needed to know in life. I learned in primary school, means that we really are indoctrinated into society even before we get into school, before it gets really heavy duty. We are already taught how to do what we're told to do. That's basically what he's saying is that in primary school, I learned the most important lesson in life in this society, and that is do what you're told to do. And that's how we've been living our whole lives since then, except for one thing, and that is instead of listening to someone else tell us what to do, we try to figure it out in advance so that we go do it, but we do it with the same animal position, that we don't, in fact, go take out the trash joyfully, that we take out the trash miserably because mom told us to do it last time, and so we did it miserably last time, so now I'm in the habit of taking out the trash and being miserable about it. And so those old habits then mean that we need to start making some changes. And the first big change that we can make is within Anapanasati is coming to the position that everything is already okay. Whether the trash is taken out or not, everything is still okay. Everything is all right. No problems, no worries, no place to go, and nothing to do. And so we can just relax. And in that relaxation is where that first jhana will arise. But if there's any fear, no jhana. If there's any demands, no jhana. If there's any hindrances, no jhanas. If there's a great big audience, unless we're skilled, no jhana. And so our training in this society may have gotten us ready for the society that we live in, but it has not gotten us ready to live a happy, joyful life. And we could do that. Our society could actually change the methods, the way that they do um, uh, primary school, and change the entire society by letting the children keep their happiness rather than taking it away from them. All right, kids, settle down. Grim up, folks. Do what you're told to do. That's the primary teaching that we give our kids. And there's better things that we can do with them. And so that means then that as adults, when we come to meditation, we have to relearn how to be kids. We have to relearn. We have to go back to that 2 and 3 year old state where we don't really have anything to do and no place to go. That mommy's out doing what she's doing, and I'm not in play school or in primary school, kindergarten, all of these words for it, where they're actually training the kids in these social skills that wind up keeping us miserable our whole lives. So now we have to come back and sit down, getting away from that entire society, come out of primary school, and just sit on the floor and be happy with no place to go and nothing to do. And we need to practice this over and over and over and over again because we've been practicing being busy. Now it's time to practice to have nothing to do. And that's marvelous. All the work that needed to be done has already been done. And we can have that mentality actually while we're taking out the trash. That it becomes a game to play. Jesus had this statement, suffer the little children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of God. Okay? We're talking about that joyful, happy little state. A lot of times when we think of the kingdom of God uh, is for children, that's like God's the adult, and He's ordering everybody around through heaven to do what they're told to do. That's the kind of mentality that we have about heaven. But the reality is that our life can be heaven when we have nothing to do, no place to go, when our any jobs that needed to be done are no longer seen as jobs. And so this is the way that we begin to practice, to come out of those kind of thoughts of work to do, of things to do, and just keep telling ourselves, everything's okay right now. Everything's fine. Not a problem in the world. Wow, everything right now is just so nice. And we keep practicing. And pretty soon we begin to feel like there's no place to go and there's nothing to do, which means then that we feel safe. We feel secure. If things are dangerous, then we've got work to do. We got to get ourselves back into a state of safety, even if that means beating up a cop. That's probably not going to work out very well for us. And so we have to keep coming back to this: no place to go and nothing to do, and we feel safe and we feel comfortable. If we're uncomfortable, then we've got something to do. We need to adjust the body or whatever to get it into a state of comfort. So getting ourselves into a state of comfort, no place to go and nothing to do, and now we can finally relax. That's where that body relaxation comes in, because we also feel relaxed and the mind is relaxed. And so this is basically then that first jhana, is when we feel safe, secure, comfortable, relaxed, and satisfied that this is okay. And when we keep practicing that, safe, secure, comfortable, and satisfied, over and over again, we begin to develop the attitude, this is great, this is nice, I can do this. Wow, this is so good. And that's the state of the piti, which has to do with the quality of being a winner, being a champion. I can do this. I can feel good. I can feel safe. I don't have to go shopping to feel safe. I don't have to go take the garbage out to feel safe. Then, in fact, when I thought of the garbage, I took it out then, and so I already took the garbage out. So the job has been done. Now I can sit here and feel safe. And so safe, secure, comfortable, and relaxed. That's the state of the first jhana. And that we can develop that so that we can bring it up when we need it. Like Michael, when we're walking out on stage. Can we walk out on stage all uptight? Or can we walk out on stage being comfortable and relaxed? Then in fact, you probably will deliver better talk if you're comfortable and relaxed than if you are trying to remember to put in every point and being uptight about it, being afraid of the audience. Yes, Michael, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so if I'm taking out the garbage, taking out the trash, don't feel a sense of responsibility, feel satisfied with it. That's the first jhana. The second jhana of taking out the trash.
The second jhana is not for taking out the trash.
The trash is already taken out.
Right. In the second jhana, for sure, the trash has been taken out, especially, excuse me, especially because in the second jhana, we don't think about trash. That the second jhana is when all the thoughts of trash taking out are finished. And that the only thing that we're now paying much attention to is how good we feel. It's been said that you can develop up to the second jhana in walking meditation, but you have to, if you're going, let us say, in a set path between point A and point B, and there may be walking between two trees, that in some meditation places they actually have a pathway with stone boundaries. But after people use the walking meditation pathway, it begins to get beat down, and you can see it. It's not just the two stones walking in the grass. No, there's no more grass that's been cut down. It's now just a sandy walkway. And in there, you can go into the second jhana, but when you get to the end, you have to have the thought, I've got to turn around. If you're lucky, you'd go back into the first jhana in order to have that thought, I've got to turn around, and then walking back to the other direction, we can go back into the second jhana. But normally the second jhana is referenced for just sitting with no thoughts, nothing to do, really no place to go, nothing to do, and no thoughts. Just experience how good we feel. That's the second jhana. So, without even going into the higher jhanas, we can recognize that some places these jhanas are inappropriate. In the world, they're not appropriate. First jhana is full. Sure, fine. Let's go out into the world in first jhana. But in second jhana, the mind has been, let us say, the thoughts have ceased. That in fact, it's probably a good idea for you to understand the process of doing that, because no one with a busy mind can just stop it. Okay, it's almost like we have to apply the brakes and slow it down to the point that it will stop. But as we're applying the brakes, it gets slower and slower and slower until it finally stops. So using a big truck, or let us say a racing car that's running at 100 miles an hour, and he wants to stop just by touching his foot on the brake, and the car just does not go from 100 miles an hour to zero. It just doesn't stop that way. Okay, physics are in there. And physics says, that you can't make such an instant change. Brakes are not that good, for one thing, and another thing is it would probably do a great deal of damage to the car to stop it instantly, just like the kind of damage a car is done when you run it at 100 miles an hour into a great big brick wall or into a big tree. A lot of damage is done by stopping it instantly. So we have to look at slowing the mind down. And the way that we can do that is by, first off, the important thing is that when we get the mind into a wholesome state, which means that we're having only wholesome thoughts, we have actually removed about 90 to 99% of all the possible thoughts that you could have. And when the mind is a monkey mind jumping all over the place, we need to get it to be confined, to get it down to just wholesome things. The example that I use is, imagine that a wild horse is just out there in the wild, in the wilderness. He can get himself caught in the box canyon. He can get his foot caught in rock crevices. He can fall into a thicket of brambles. All kinds of possibilities for the horse out in the wild. But what we can do is we can take and fence off a pasture, so that the pasture has only good grass that the horse likes to eat. So he doesn't even want to jump over the fence anymore and go back out into the wild. He wants to stay in his pasture. Okay, so this is just only wholesome thoughts. And then when the horse begins to get into real training, we put him into an even smaller place like a corral. And so in a corral, then we can say, by corralling the mind, that means now that we're going to have the mind do just one little thing over and over again, or maybe a sequence. An example of that is singing a song. When you're singing a song that you know the words, the lyrics for it, then going start to finish, you're staying with the mind inside of that song. Reciting a poem would be the same thing, or even chanting. That when the monks are chanting, they're corralling the mind into a very tight little place. So that would be the corral. And then a smaller place would be putting the horse in the stall, where he can't move very much. This would then be a mantra where we do boo on the in-breath and do on the out-breath. And so this is when we're getting the mind just more and more focused, because we're only having just a very, very few words. And now that's where we can stop the mind. So you can imagine then back to the car going 100 miles an hour is like out into the wild. And that we can then put it into a corral means now it's down to about 35, maybe 20 kilometers an hour. It's just nice and easy pace. And then the next one would be down to the corral where we're running at about 5 miles an hour. And then down to the stall, it's very easy to stop a car that's running 5 miles an hour. In fact, if a car is running down the road, running down a hill at 5 miles an hour, you can actually get in front of that car and stop it. But if it's running 25 miles an hour down that down the road or down the hill, good luck stopping it at 25. And if you try to stop a car that's running at 100 miles an hour, you're dead meat. So this is the way. This is that we got to confine the mind and slow the mind down. Your noise, your microphone's very noisy.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, now I can hear you. So your mic is muted. Okay, so if we could get the mind running down to just a few miles an hour, 1, 2, or 3 miles an hour, now we can bring it down to stopping it. And that would be going into the second jhana. How do we stop the mind then? Is that we use the breath, or one of the processes we can do is to use the breath, so that we only have 1 or 2 words on the in-breath and 1 or 2 words on the out-breath, like a mantra. An example of 1 or 2 words would be Om Namah Shivaya. So Om Namo would be the in-breath, and then Shiva or Shivaya would be on the out-breath. Or Budo, Bu on the in-breath, and Do on the out-breath. And now the breathing is very slow and very easy. And on that out-breath, we can stop the mind. Bu on the in-breath, a long in-breath, and then Do on the out-breath. And at the end of the out-breath, we don't take another in-breath. We stop the mind and we start looking at it. Then, in fact, almost every time that this happens, especially to the new students, is that they say they can recognize that the mind has just stopped. And then they go, wow, look at that, I did it, I did it, I did it. And then they're out of it again because they're out, they're jumping around in joy and starting the mind up again. So never mind,
I
start
just had
again.
that exact experience when you described it. So why those sounds or words in particular? Just
Any word will
tradition
do.
or
Any word will do, so long as it's a happy, wholesome kind of word like Budo, because that's in Thailand, in northeast Thailand, they teach that mantra, and we have a great affinity to the Buddha, and so Budo is a natural word to use. In India, because they're Hindu, Om Namah Shivaya would be a good mantra because they pay respect to Shiva. That's what they're saying in the mantra. But Americans, maybe those Asian mantras wouldn't work so well. Maybe we need some American words. How about Calvin on the in-breath and Coolidge on the out-breath? Wait a minute, that may not be the best one to do. Calvin Coolidge, I don't think will take you into the second jhana if you knew who he was. So, another example of that would be, and this actually is personal, Coca-Cola. Coca on the in-breath and cola on the out-breath. And pay attention to Coca-Cola, the bubbles, the color, the sweetness, the coolness of it, okay? Now, there's a story behind that. And the story is that when I was a little kid, I had a tummy ache, and Mom took me to Doctor. In fact, I still remember his name. I remember so much about that doctor, Dr. Young. Um, and he recommended Mom buy a 6-pack of Coca-Colas that were in the little 6-ounce bottles way back in the 1950s. And that was almost like a miracle for me. I'd never had Coca-Cola before. It was too expensive, but because the doctor had recommended it, I had Coca-Cola for the first time. And so when somebody mentioned that Coca-Cola would be a good mantra, I said, absolutely. Coca-Cola is a really, really good um, mantra for Westerners. I would go so far as to say another one would be hamburger, or maybe French fries, or how about Spider-Man? These would be mantras that would be good for the Westerners because it's part of our culture. And also it has meaning. That don't take a mantra that has no meaning for you. So giving Om Namah Shivaya to the Westerner has no meaning to it. Buddha does not have any meaning for the Indians either. So we need to find a mantra that's suitable. That in fact in Hinduism they go to the guru for the guru to give them a mantra. Well, if the guru knows what he's doing, he's going to give them a mantra that's going to work for that student. And if he doesn't know what he's doing, he'll just grab some mantra out of his magic bag of tricks and give that to the student. And good luck with that. So when you're choosing a mantra, choose one that actually has that quality of slowing the mind down and taking it out of the mental state and putting it into the physical reality. That in fact, one of the things about the Coca-Cola as a mantra, one of the ways you know that it's working is when you begin to have a lot of saliva in your mouth. That you can actually get your whole mouth all watered up because of the thought of the mantra that you're having.
Isn't
So,
that kind of inciting craving?
pardon?
Isn't that kind of inciting craving?
Yeah, well, if you go and want that Coca-Cola and you get up and go get it, or even you think about, I want a Coke, that's
Yeah, but
crazy.
I mean the salivating is already an indication that the body is getting prepared to receive it.
Well, no, you're thinking about it in a different way. Perhaps you can think of that the salivation is because you've already got the Coke. It's your mantra. You've already got it. I mean, that's why the mouth is salivating, is because it's got that experience there. Okay, but it's
Okay.
always completely wholesome. And that when you recognize now the mind has stopped, that's quite an accomplishment because the mind is spinning and spinning and spinning on and on and on. In fact, we keep kicking it to keep it going. Now we're going to let the mind relax and let it coast to a stop. And the mind can now come into that second jhana, which now the only thing to experience would be that sense of saliva, that the input, because we're not doing much processing now. We're just experiencing reality without any thought about it at all. But the important reality that we do in the second jhana is how good we feel, how nice this is. That in fact, um, here's the point, doing the Coca-Cola mantra while the mind still has hindrances, the desire will be for the Coca-Cola there. But we're already talking about moving from first jhana to where every thought is absolutely wholesome because we started it that way. And first, the mind is full of hindrances. Now we get it down to just one little thing, like the pasture, where we only have wholesome thoughts. And then we get it down to just the corral, to where um, we're only having a little song or maybe a chant or something like that that the monks do, repeating a poem over and over again. like Ipitiso, Bhagava, Araha, Samma, Sambuto, Ika, Charana, Sampano, Lo, Gavidu, Anutaro, Purisadama, Sada, Deva, Manusanam, Buddho, Bhagavati. And many places they will say that little chant over and over and over again. In fact, it takes about 2.5 hours to do it 108 times. But if you can do that little mantra, that little saying, that many times, now your mind is ready to go down to the Coca-Cola. Just Coca, Coca, Coca.
Is that something you think a mala is useful in helping with, or is that just more of a hindrance?
What was that? What's the hindrance?
It, is that something that you think like the mala beads are useful and helpful to do, or is that just more of a hindrance? Maybe
Um,
counting your mantras on a mala bead.
I would have to say that the answer to that is complicated. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, sometimes both together. That it can be both wholesome and unwholesome at the same time. Um, if you've got your mala beads and you're counting, or not necessarily counting the beads, but you're doing it like the stations of the rosary or a little saying with each bead or whatever like that, then that can be very much like a mantra. But then what happens when you drop the beads, or what if the thread breaks, or what if you've lost your thing, like the little beads that they often have will be around your wrist, and it's possible for you to be busy working on your car or whatever and break that mala, or it slips off your hand, and now because your meditation is dependent upon that mala, oh poor me, I've lost my mala, what am I going to do now? But when we recognize that the mala's got nothing to do with it other than an object to hold, then we could actually use a different object to hold. An example would be like a pair of pliers or dikes or cutters. You could just hold that in your hand and move it in and out with the breath, paying attention to what your fingers are doing. But in fact, this part of the mudras is to pay attention to what your hands are doing, as opposed to paying attention to the object that we're carrying. So carrying something, when we're holding it and carrying it, we always are thinking about, or maybe not the object. And in fact, it's quite possible for us to drop something because we're not paying attention to what our hands are doing. And so taking the focus off of the object and on to what the hands are doing. The example here would be that when I touch that object, which is the first finger that touches it? Will it be this little finger here? Will it be the thumb? And what are each of the fingers? Can you feel what each of the fingers are doing while they're holding this object? Can you play with that? Like taking fingers off, doing this. Other mudras have to do with, like you've seen this one, okay? Where do we pay attention to that is between the thumb and the index finger. Can they feel each other? Can the thumb feel the index finger? Can the index finger feel the thumb? Can they both feel each other? Pay attention closely now, and how close do they have to get? Can you get them to where you can experience the touch, but it's physically not yet touching? There we go. Okay. So you can come down to that and pay attention to that kind of stuff. The human body is such a marvelous toy, and yet we don't play with it much. Then, in fact, we're taught not to play with it. Oh, you should, don't play with that part anyway. And yet, the human body is the best toy that we've got. The human mind is such a marvelous toy to play with. So playing with the mudras, finding out what the hands are doing, and working with that. In fact, we could talk a whole talk on what to do with the hands and the hand mudras, because there's quite a number of them. You can see in all the various Buddhist art, Almost all of the Buddhist art has the statue of some monk doing something specific with his hands, whether they're folded like this, or whether they're done this way, or whether they're doing this, or whatever like that. That's because the monk is paying attention to his body, to his hands. That's the funny thing about the Goenka retreat method. When they're doing the body scanning, they don't pay much attention to the hands. And in fact, the hands are very, very complicated. We should spend 5 or 10 minutes paying just attention to the hands, looking at what they're doing. And so we can do this out in the world too. Once we get used to figuring out what the hands are doing, we can use the hands as a toy, let us say while we're waiting for the doctor. That we can take the thing, and now I'm turning up like this, is notice that the thumbs, I'm not just twirling the thumbs ignorantly and absent-mindedly. Each thumb is experiencing the other. That when I go like this, I can feel the nail right here on this finger, like that. So twirling the thumbs is actually, when you're paying close attention to it, a very, very good practice. And yet, in our society, oh, he's just off there twiddling his thumbs as if he's not getting anything done, right? But within the context that we're working with, that's exactly what we want. Just twiddling our thumbs, but we're paying close attention, mindfully twiddling our thumbs, mindfully making contact and touching and feeling and experiencing. And so you're not going to get the trash taken out by doing that, but you can take the trash out while you're experiencing the sensations of the hands touching the basket or whatever of the trash. And so we can actually take out the trash while we're practicing anapanasati. Normally we don't. Normally we take out the trash because it has to be done and we don't want to do it, but we got to do it, and so we do it, but we don't like it. Guess what? We live our whole lives like that. Everything that we do, we don't want to do it, but we have to do it anyway, and so we do it and we don't like it. Here we're changing all of that around to being able to get into a state of really, really enjoying, but we start enjoying nothing at all. And then we can take that enjoyment and pay attention to what we're doing and start doing what we're doing with mindfulness and great skill. And we're continuing to do the meditation, but now we've added something to it. That a lot of students get the idea that the teaching is to get to the state of doing nothing and then you're finished. No, we want to get our mind to the state of doing nothing, no place to go and nothing to do, and everything is marvelous. And now in that state of first jhana, I can go get a whole lot of stuff done. I can drive the truck while in first jhana. I cannot drive the truck in second jhana. Why? Because we need to tell ourselves about the dangers. Look where you're going. Drive that truck, and we can do that by having the thoughts. But when the thoughts are no longer there, then we have to be in a state of nothing to do and no place to go because we're not thinking about anything anymore. But I remember years ago a dialogue that was on some group, maybe it was a video, where the teacher and the student were driving in the car together, and the guy was talking about, okay, now I'm going into second jhana. Well, you can't say now you're going into second jhana. You're not going into second jhana if you're talking about second jhana. And then he says, now I'm going into third jhana. That's not possible. And you certainly can't drive a car. And so these guys are just playing with terms and they don't really know what they're talking about. But it's very, very clearly specified in the suttas that what we pay attention to in the second jhana is how good we feel. The piti, the sukha, especially the piti. And so the mudras and all of that hand stuff would be a preliminary for going into the second jhana. Wow, this has been an hour and 40 minutes. This has just flown by. I was just getting warmed up. No wonder people have been leaving. Eric, do you have any
This has been
comments?
great.
Okay, Michael, that's good. Yes, we've been talking about some of the details of going into second jhana and how to get the mind stable enough, slow enough that it can actually stop. Eric, what you got on?
It's a nice refresher to focus more on the body sensations. Because lately I've been really good at getting into a good state, but that tip of using a mantra at the end when I'm already at a good state, I haven't been applying that lately. So I'm gonna do that paired with paying really close attention to the hands and the fine sensations of the body. I've been doing that right now and it feels really good.
Okay. Veda, are you on yet? I talked to you a while ago and you weren't there. Are you here now? No, Veda's out. All right, never mind. Guys, thank you so much. This has been a really good talk. Does anybody have any questions at the end? Or is everybody feeling satisfied? Okay,
Being
guys.
satisfied.
Yeah, let us be satisfied. Everything is good. All right. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much. This has been a delightful time.
Thanks, Dhammarato. Thanks, Michael, for the questions.
Yes, Michael, good.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye bye, guys. Thank you.